Hello and welcome. My name is Lisa and I am the Senior Learning Manager here at the Jewish Museum. Thank you so much for joining us for this Wednesday Wisdom, our live object talk series. So today we're going to be exploring one object on the theme of change. Now, the object I've selected is one of over 40,000 objects in the Jewish Museum London's designated collection that shows the diversity of Jewish life and history. Our programs exist to preserve the unique and diverse voices of Jewish communities and explore connections between faiths and cultures. So this month, our theme has been change. And the object I've chosen today will explore this theme through one family's experience. So I'm going to share my screen now. Okay. So we are looking at a black and white studio portrait taken possibly around 1912, but it could have been a couple of years after as well. And we can see in this photograph 5 of the sons of Philip and Kitty Isaacs. So in the back row from left to right, we have Michael, we have Israel, who was the eldest son, and Samuel. And then in the front row, again, left to right, we have Jacob, known as Jack, and Morris. Now, the eldest son, Israel, this one here, he was born in Russia. And he came to England with his parents, Philip and Kitty, in around 1875. And all of the other sons that we can see in this photograph were born in the East End of London. Now, not pictured in this photograph are the Isaacs' other children. So they had a son, Abraham, and they had daughters, Ada, Sarah, Rose, and Millie. So Philip Isaacs, the father of the family, was born in Russia, and he came to England around 1875 with his wife, Kate, who was known as Kitty, and his eldest son, Israel. Kitty was born in Vienna, and this really was the first example, one of the first examples of change in the Isaacs family life. So migrating from Russia to create a new life in the UK. Now, this was a period of change for many Jewish people living in Eastern Europe. Between 1880 and 1914, around 3 million Jewish people left their homes in Russia and other parts of Eastern Europe to start a new life in places like the USA, the UK, South Africa, Argentina, just to name a few. Now, this was sparked by a series of pogroms, so attacks against the Jewish people after the assassination of the Tsar. And this religious persecution and lack of opportunities forced Jewish people to migrate to new homes in the hopes of changing their lives for the better. Many of these Jewish immigrants were attracted to Britain because of the religious freedom, the sense of safety, and also some were joining relatives who had actually migrated earlier. Around 150,000 Jewish people from Eastern Europe and Russia migrated to the UK, including the Isaacs family. Now, the Isaacs family moved to London and eventually settled in the East End, which had a decent-sized Jewish community at this time. And we have a few photographs and documents in our collection that can tell us a little bit more about the Isaacs family and about their life in the UK. Now, one of the documents we have in our collection is a census of England and Wales from 1911. And we know that at this time, the Isaacs family were living in Philpott Street in Stepney in the East End. Now, at this time, Philip and Kitty had 9 children still living at home, 5 sons, and 4 daughters. However, the census also tells us that Kitty actually gave birth to 13 children. 2, unfortunately, had died, and 11 were still living at that time. Now, we also know that their eldest son, Israel, is not included in the census, so we can conclude that he must have already left home by that time. But that still leaves one child that is not accounted for, who we don't have any information about. Now, as I've mentioned, Israel was the only child to have been born in Russia, with all of the others being born in Stepney. So there are a few interesting discrepancies in the information that we do have about the family. There are some contradictions as to Kitty's exact age when the census was recorded, as well as some uncertainty about the exact year that Kitty and Philip were married. Now, there's a few explanations for these discrepancies or these uncertainties. It could be that there was simply a language barrier, and Kitty and Philip might not have fully understood all of the questions they were being asked. But there's also the possibility that they were not exactly sure about the year in which they had been born, as this was not uncommon during this time period, during the 19th century. It was also common at this time for men to lie about their age in order to avoid mandatory conscription into the Russian army. Now, the census records also tell us what each family member did for a living. So Philip was a tailor. He was a waistcoat maker specifically. And tailoring was a very common profession for Jewish people at this time, as this was one of the only professions available to Jewish people who were living in Russia. So many Jewish immigrants, when they migrated to a new country, were able to take these skills with them and join the tailoring trade. Now, some of Philip's children followed in his footsteps. Samuel worked as an assistant furrier, and their daughter Ada was a machiner in the fur trade. 2 other daughters, Sarah and Rose, worked in tailoring shops as well, and one of their sons, Abraham, worked as a laborer. Now, 4 of the sons pictured in this photograph, so Michael, Israel, Jack, and Morris. So Michael here, Israel, Jack, and Morris, they made a change from the family profession of tailoring, and they followed a completely different trade. They ended up becoming hairdressers. Now, Israel was the first son, the first brother to become a hairdresser, and he actually trained all of his younger brothers in the profession. The brothers opened their first hairdressers on Cleveland Street in Mile End. And later in the 1920s and the 1930s, the hairdressers moved to 68 Whitechapel Road until 1938. And then it moved just a few doors down to 56 Whitechapel Road, just up until the Second World War, so just about a year. Now, the brothers also had another hairdressers in Canonbury called the Orange Saloon, which served both ladies and men, and another one in Star Road in Bermondsey called B. Walter Shaving and Haircutting Saloon. Now, their father, Philip, passed away in 1931. So before the brothers opened multiple hairdressers. And one of the things that the brothers did after their father passed away was actually changed their surname. So they changed their surname from Isaacs to Phillips. So in honor of their father's first name. So they became Jack Phillips, Morris Phillips, Israel Phillips, Michael Phillips. So there's another layer as well to this name change as well, which is, and of course, an example of assimilation. Isaacs is very clearly a Jewish name, and by anglicizing it and changing it to Phillips, in one way they were honoring their father, but it also, by anglicizing their name and changing it, might have enabled them to have better business opportunities and also be more accepted easily into the wider British society. So at the Jewish Museum, we are really proud to have the history of the Isaacs family in our collection and to be able to share their story with you as part of the wider history of Jewish communities in the UK. So thank you so much for joining me for this object talk, and do join us next week on Wednesday at 12 noon for the next object talk in our series.